Whether you're looking for a name for your future baby or you're just here out of curiosity, here are 80 Spanish names, both male and female, that have their origin in Latin. Adrian comes from Adrianus, which means inhabitant of Adria, a human settlement in ancient Italy. Augusto from the Latin Augustus, which comes from augere, meaning to increase, so Augusto means the exalted or the venerable. Alba comes from the word albus, which means the first light of the day or dawn. Angelica has its origin in angelicus, which means related to angels, and this comes from angelus, the messenger. Bonifacio comes from the words bonum and facere, which can be translated as I do good. Beatrice has its origin in the word benedictrix, or Beatrix, which means someone who is happy or blessed. Claudio is usually attributed to the Latin Claudus, which means someone who limps or walks with difficulty, but it is possible that its origin is much older. Clemente comes from the word clemens, or clementia, or clementius, and it means someone who is gentle and kind. Christian, from the Latin Christianus, which means follower of Christ. Cecilia from the Latin Cecilius, and this from Cecus, which means blind. So Cecilia means little blind one. Celeste comes from the word celestis, which means the one who comes from the sky. Clara comes from claris and means the bright and transparent one. Emilio comes from the name Emilius, and this from emulus, which means the rival. Estella. Its origin is in the word stella, which means the star. Fabio comes from the root fabius, which means the one who harvests beans. Fidel comes from fidelis, and this from fides, which in Latin means faith, so it translates as worthy of faith. Felicia, the feminine version of Felix, which means the fortunate one. Florencia, from Florentia, and at its root floris, the flower. Florentia means the one who blooms. Galliano comes from Gallianus, which means from Gaul, a region now known as France. Genaro comes from Januarius, which means consecrated to the god Janus, the god of peace. Gema, from the Latin word gema, means the precious stone. Gloria comes from the same name in Latin gloria and means splendor. Honorio has its origin in the root honoris, which means honorary or honorable. Horatio derives from Horatius, which means consecrated to the hours. Elvia, from the Latin elvis or elvelus, means golden colored, so Elvia means the blonde, from Vot. Hortensia comes from hortus, which means garden, so Hortensia means the gardener. Ignacio, from Ignatius, is believed to come from ignis and natus, which means born of fire. Isadora comes from the words Isis Donum, which means the gift of Isis, the Egyptian goddess of fertility. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to get notified about new videos. Justo, from the Latin justus, means someone who is honorable. Julia is believed to come from Iovilius, which means consecrated to Iovis or Jupiter. Lionel comes from Leonelus, which means little lion. Lorenzo comes from Laurentius and means crowned with laurels. Lucas comes from the word Lucius, which means the one who shines. Letitia comes from Letitia, which means joy or happiness. Liliana, from the Latin lilium, the lily flower, means pure as the lilies. Livia comes from lividus and means the one with olive color. Lucia comes from the root lux or Lucius and means the bearer of light. Lucretia comes from Lucretius, and this from lucrum, which means profit. So Lucretia is the one who wins. Marcus comes from Marcus, and this from Demarticus, consecrated to the god Mars. Mauricio, from the Latin moris, which was used to refer to someone with dark skin. Maximo, from the Latin name Maximus, and it means the greatest of all. Mabel comes from amabilis, and it means the one who is kind or loved. Marina comes from Marinus, which means the one who belongs to the sea. Mercedes, from the word merces or Mercedes, which means freedom or reward, means the one who frees. Natalia, derived from natalis dies, which means day of birth in relation to the nativity of Christ. Octavio comes from Octavus, which means the eighth son. Ovidio derives from Ovidius, and this from ovis, sheep, so it means the one who takes care of the sheep. Olivia comes from Olivus. The olive can mean bearer of peace, since the olive branch was a symbol of peace. Pasquale, from the Latin pascalis, means the one born at Easter. Pedro comes from Petrus, which means the stone. Pio has its origin in pious, which means the pious one. Patricia, from the Latin patricius, means the one who carries nobility. Paula comes from the adjective paulus, which means small or humble. Piedad comes from the word pietas, which means mercy. Renato comes from Renatus, which means the reborn. Romanus means the one who comes from Rome. Romulo comes from Romulus, and together with Remo, was one of the founders of Rome, according to legend. Regina comes from the Latin regina, which means the queen. Rocio comes from the word rosidus, which means the one covered in dew. Rosora comes from the words rose and aurum, which means the golden rose. Sergio, from the Latin Sergius, which for some Etruscan peoples meant the protector. Salvo. De Salvius, which means the healthy one. Sixto comes from Sextus, which means the sixth son. Serena comes from Serenum, so it means the calm and peaceful one. Sylvia comes from De Silvius, and this from De Silva, which means from the forest. Socorro, from the word succurrere, means helper, the one who comes to help. Tarcitio, coming from Tarsos, a city in Asia. Menor Tiberio comes from Tiberius, dedicated to the Tiber River. Tullio from Tullius, and this one possibly from the Etruscan Tul, which means violent stream. Tertia from Tertius, which means the third, and Titiana comes from Titianus, and this from Titius, which means the protected one. Trinidad comes from Trinitas and means the one who is worth three. Ulysses came to Latin through the Etruscan Ulus, and it means the one who hates. Ursula comes from Ursulus, which means the little bear. Valentin comes from the word Valentinus, which means the one who is brave. Valerio comes from valere, which means strong and healthy. Vicente comes from Vicentius, which in turn comes from Vicens, meaning the winner. Violeta comes from viola, which is the same name for the color in the flower, and it means the one who is modest. Virginia comes from Virginius, which means related to life. Viviana comes from the Latin vivens, which means the one who lives. And that's all for today. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to this channel. I invite you to also activate the bell so you'll be notified when there's a new video. See you soon.